Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you. I want you to meet me on Blue Sky, santitajackson.bsky.social. I'm still on X at SantitaJ, at SantitaJ, and Facebook, facebook.com/Santita Jackson and Friends. Everybody, please go to Santita Jackson and Friends. I can't take on any friends at Santita Jackson. I keep getting requests from you, and I'm so honored, but they have a limit. And I met that many, many years ago, but I can't get a fan page. That is a page that accommodates more of my friends unless I keep this page. So if you would, please just shortcut. Please get on over to Santita Jackson and Friends and meet Bernadette. She was there first at the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. So no, excuse me, the Santita Jackson Show Facebook page. So many of you have joined, and more and more and more of you are joining. And I thank you so much for that. Maybe it's because of these conversations that we have here um, that I'm just really honored to host. Of course, part of the family here is attorney Mark Fancher with us today, brilliant attorney, civil libertarian, and author himself. But whenever I can catch this young man, Bronco Marketish, I'm always so honored to have him. Of course, I had him on some time ago as we were talking about Joe Biden. Boy, oh boy, I should have had you back with all the revelations about him. His book, Yesterday's Man, the case against Joe Biden. But he's written something very interesting that is of the moment here. It was just published in Jacobin magazine. I love this magazine, and please give it your support. I also read your work over in Responsible Statecraft and other places. But the headline is, of course, Trump doesn't want to release the Epstein files. Whew, my goodness. And it has shaken President Trump's base in a particular way. I think it's shaken a lot of people because you heard he was going to release the JFK files, the RFK files, the MLK files, and that he was going to drain the swamp. And in fact, part of his platform was the exposure of what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. Because the more that we find out about him, he's a fascinating figure, and a figure who is very, very connected. Someone who really, when you step back, I think he impacted all of our lives far more than we even know. And so there is a lot of consternation, really, well, okay, growing outrage. Let me not tamp it down with his base. Because now you've gone from Kash Patel, the FBI director, Pam Biondi, who is the attorney general, and the president himself, and his supporters who said, hey, we're going to uncover this case. We're going to release the files. You even had many influencers from the right who were given these files allegedly at the White House. And yet we heard nothing. And now, case closed. There was no client list. And that's the end of it. So I want to go through this article because this is, or should I say this research piece, because what you do is you collate so many different pieces about Jeffrey Epstein and about the people with whom he was involved, including the president and past presidents, many of whom are not named here. He really was at the top of the pyramid, and many people wonder, what has been his real role? What is his real role? I mean, because we do know that people are blackmailed over their personal lives all the time. All the time. So what is going on here? And as you said, Bronco, of course Trump doesn't want to release the Epstein tapes. Of course. If you speak to President Trump supporters, they wouldn't say that. Why did you?
Well, I think number one, the thing that we should keep in mind is that Trump's entire kind of rationale for running, and also, very much his pitch in 2016 was that he was taking on this kind of corrupt establishment, that he was going to go after the political elites that had been taking advantage of of the country, of ordinary people, and he was going to kind of set them right. And what we've seen, I think, over the course of his first term, but also particularly over the last 6 months, is that Trump has come in on that campaign pitch, and what he has done is instead kind of protected that same political elite, or in the case of this bill that he just signed into law, effectively taken money out of the pockets of the poorest Americans to give more handouts to the very rich. And I think this is part of that wider story. The reason why I think Trump is not keen to have these files see the light of day is the fact that he himself was very, very good friends with Jeffrey Epstein for many, many years. This is well documented. This has been talked about in some of the media coverage of the scandal, but I think it hasn't really. People I think have not been really given the full sense of how close these guys are. It's not just that Trump flew 7, 8 times on his plane, according to his flight logs that were released a few years ago, his private jet that was nicknamed the Lolita Express. It's not just that he was in Epstein's so-called little black book, his contact book, both of them, and that he had numerous contact details listed on that. It's not just that there's footage of them hanging out and ogling women in Mar-a-Lago back in 1992. These guys were much tighter than that. They reportedly dated the same woman. Epstein claimed that he was the one who introduced Melania Trump to the president. That's been challenged. Some people have said, no, that didn't happen. I introduced them, but that's a claim that he has made. Melania Trump's best friend appears also in the little black book of Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein's accusers have said that they either were recruited for Epstein's abuse operation at Mar-a-Lago, or that they were introduced to Trump at Mar-a-Lago by Jeffrey Epstein. There was even, people have forgotten this now, but way back in 2016, a woman had filed a lawsuit against Trump, alleging, and she was backed by 2 witnesses who said, one said that they saw this, another said that they had been told about it shortly after it happened, that when she was 13, she had been recruited by Epstein as part of this sex trafficking operation, and at some of these parties that she had actually been raped by Trump. That lawsuit was eventually dropped because the lawyer representing this woman said that she received just a flood of death threats, and there was also pressure from some of Trump's allies to drop the case. What I'm trying to say with this big list of contacts, connections between Trump and Epstein is that these guys, it's not just that they knew each other a little bit incidentally. They were very, very good friends. They moved in the same social circles. And Trump, even if he was not necessarily involved in Epstein's operation, was, just by sheer virtue of his closeness to the man, very much kind of hovering on the fringes of it.
Bronco, what about this list that the Attorney General asserted that she had on her desk? The client list. I mean, and now she's reframing it, and I know Mark understands this as a lawyer. The bending of a phrase is something at which you all are quite expert. But it beggars belief that her explanation today, as opposed to at the beginning of her term.
I mean, to some extent, the talk of there being a client list is a bit of a people have referred to it as a red herring. And that's because there probably isn't an actual client list. There isn't some kind of ledger or what have you, where everyone who Epstein ever facilitated these services for is listed somewhere. But what there is a trove of documentary evidence, some of which has been released in redacted form, some of which presumably is being held by the FBI in the process of investigating this crime, that has never been released. For what reason, we can only speculate. But so there's always talk about a client list, and so now when Pam Bondi says, well, there is no client list, and other people in the Trump administration say, no, there's no client list. That may very well be true, but it's almost we're debating kind of a phantom when the fact is, and I'm quoting here Julie K. Brown, who was the Miami Herald reporter who broke the story in the first place. It's not really about the client list. It's about the fact that there is, hundreds, maybe thousands of documents about the Epstein investigation that are publicly available right now, but they're so heavily redacted that you actually can't really make heads or tails out of it. And so that has been sitting around for years. Those could easily be publicly released with the names and identities of victims redacted to protect them. We could still see and try and get some information about who exactly Epstein was consorting with. In fact, I was just reading today that Trump reportedly had said, I think Bill O'Reilly made this claim that he had said, well, you don't want to just release everything because people had incidental connection to Jeffrey Epstein. They may have just had lunch with him or emailed with him or had some other kind of correspondence with him, but they never actually engaged in the criminal activities that he was part of. And so if you release these names, people's lives will be destroyed, their reputation's ruined. So that's why we can't do it. Now, again, Bill O'Reilly said that this is what Trump told him some time back. When you hear that, then that sounds as if the sudden about face on releasing these files is not actually motivated by the fact that these files don't exist, or they're all child pornography, as Pam Bondi claimed. But it sounds more like actually Trump is worried about kind of destroying the reputations and lives of a bunch of elite people that he perhaps ran with once upon a time, including himself, given the fact that he so closely consorted with Epstein throughout his life.
Well, what are these people alleged to have done? I mean, if you could help us understand the significance of calling his plane the Lolita Express.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty disgusting stuff. The crux of it is that Jeffrey Epstein was maybe the most prolific sex offender in modern history, and he is alleged to have had hundreds, if not thousands, of victims, many of whom have not and will never come forward. If you read about the case, the people that worked for him, including Ghislaine Maxwell, his kind of partner and a former friend of Trump's, and kind of this person who ran an elite society circles. But not just her, also the girls that he would pick up, these underage girls he would pick up for this sex trafficking. They would all go out and recruit these girls, and sometimes they talked about how he would have one or two of these underage girls, and he would abuse them every single day. And he did that over the course of years. And the further allegation is not just that Epstein did this, but then that he would, as a kind of sick favor, he would then allow his wealthy friends to also abuse these girls. One of the accusers of Epstein has talked about how in his mansion, and the FBI found this as well, by the way, when they investigated one of his homes, how he had these secret rooms in his house where he would have surveillance equipment. When the FBI, in other words, when this abuse was taking place, when these powerful people that he was hanging out with were engaging in this abuse, Epstein would film it, and then he would have the footage or photographs of it. And in fact, when the FBI went through Epstein's homes, when they raided them, when they arrested him, they found binders full of CDs that themselves were full of photographs and videos. They found CDs labeled with names. They found hard drives. Some of that later went missing mysteriously, which was held in a safe. And so the theory, the speculation, is that Epstein was holding on to this material so that he could blackmail the people that were doing it, the powerful people that kind of got close to him and then lured into taking part in this abuse. I mean, I say it's a theory, but there's also a lot of evidence that suggests that this wasn't just a theory, that in fact this is exactly what Epstein was doing.
We're talking with Branko Markic. He has a tremendous piece in Jacobin magazine, and I urge you to get it because the headline is this: of course Trump doesn't want to release the Epstein files. And as you go through this piece, you see, because he's all up in it, but it's not just him. It's former presidents. It's captains of industry. I mean, you went into, you didn't name names, you didn't have to, but Silicon Valley, Elon Musk. I mean, we can just keep on going. This is huge. And you pointed out that the president was uncharacteristically rattled, it seemed, when he was asked about it once again. Please.
Yeah, usually when Trump is asked about this issue, he tends to kind of downplay how much he knew him. He says that, again, Epstein is this guy that I used to hang out with, but I'm not a fan of him. He would say, yes, it's interesting that these names haven't come out. I'm in favor of doing it. Kind of, he's always taken the tack, at least before he had re-entered office, that he was perfectly comfortable with releasing information, releasing the names of the people that were around him. But suddenly now that it's become, it's gotten on the cusp of actually happening, and now that it's become this very hot button issue, Trump was asked about it, and he was also asked about Epstein's potential alleged intelligence ties. And Trump has this very uncharacteristic kind of eruption of anger and frustration, where he berates the reporter for even asking a question. He says, why are people even asking about this? Why does anyone care? Where there's all this other stuff happening. Why is this important? I can't believe that you would ask me that. It feels like a kind of loss of emotional control. And I think it points to the agitation that this topic is creating for him, not just because of his own very, very deep personal connection to this notorious and quite sickening figure, but then also the fact that, as you say, it is kind of roiling his base, who feel betrayed by the fact that Trump had spent the 2024 campaign saying that he was going to release this stuff, and now has just kind of done a complete 180 on it.
I mean, and then you add to this Virginia Giuffre, who just allegedly committed suicide. No one believes that, and she even said, and she's one of the victims, who was to have received a payout from Prince Andrew. Yes.
Yeah. Giuffre said that she had been that Prince Andrew had been one of the people that she had been kind of pimped out to by Jeffrey Epstein. And there is a famous photograph, of course, with an underage Giuffre, with Prince Andrew and with Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Epstein's co-conspirator and is actually now in prison. I mean, her death. Yeah,
because she's in prison. If there's no client list, why is she still in prison?
Well, this is the thing, and in fact, I mean, there was another story today as well that I think Michael Wolff reported this, that there was a discussion. Yeah, exactly. There was a discussion within Trump's inner circle, according to him. I mean, this is one source, but according to him, that when she was put in prison, that Trump floated actually pardoning her because he was worried about what she would say, that she would come out and kind of, burn all the bridges and release everything. And his advisors had to tell him, actually, maybe that's not a good idea because that would just look far worse and blow up in his face. But yeah, I mean, the fact that she is in prison, it's very strange because at the moment, both the Trump administration and the media are kind of saying that, oh, well, this whole idea that there was this kind of sprawling conspiracy is all a completely ridiculous thing. But I mean, that someone has been, convicted, and of course, Epstein himself was in prison once upon a time.
Do Why should we care about this, Bronco?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, this guy was a member, a carrying member of the political and business elite for many, many years. I mentioned Prince Andrew. He had connections with all kinds of elected officials. Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, Ehud Barak, former Israeli Prime Minister, Tony Blair, former British Prime Minister. He was a guy who was accepted into every portion of the kind of elite strata, despite the fact that he was this, like I said, notorious sex criminal. And even after he after he was convicted and nominally served time for it, people continued to associate with him after that, including people like Bill Gates.
And didn't he try to blackmail Bill Gates?
Well, and that's the other thing. The Trump administration's claim now is that not only is there no kind of client list, not only is there nothing to be seen in terms of the list of names of people, but also they said there's no evidence that he ever tried to blackmail anyone. And that is completely absurd, because just 2 years ago, Bill Gates's own spokeswoman said to the Wall Street Journal, when they published a story about how Epstein had kind of used his knowledge of Bill Gates's affair with another woman to kind of threaten him and possibly extort him. Her spokesman said that Epstein tried to use his knowledge of this relationship to threaten Mr. Gates. That's her word, threaten. So we know for a fact he has already certainly blackmailed people. He has at least blackmailed Bill Gates. Yeah. So I mean, if he had this kind of possible leverage to use against some of the most powerful people in society, and he was so friendly with so many people, again, across the political spectrum, not just Donald Trump, but Bill Clinton, another former president, was one known as a good friend of his, flew multiple times on his jet.
So this was not
speaks to a level
Democrats
of corruption
or Republicans. This is
exactly
the powerful,
and that's before you get to the intelligence, the possible intelligence ties, which makes this even more kind of murky and I would say alarming.
Well, before we get into his links to intelligence, because that's a lot, I'd like to hear Attorney Mark Fancher weigh in on what you're hearing, because this has been quite disconcerting to his base. I mean, you have people who are really up in arms because they're saying, you've broken the trust. We've gotten more wars. Medicare is being cut. Social Security, the social safety net's being slashed. We're growing the military budget. And now this. We expected to get a list because people do believe that he was blackmailing folks. And blackmailing folks for whom and to do what? Attorney Mark Fancher.
Well, one of the beautiful things about being the scum of the earth, which is what Donald Trump is, and also having a reputation for being such, is that it gives you a certain comfort level in terms of your own situation and what worries you have or don't have about what may be said about you. And he probably had for some time was quite comfortable, even though he was all involved with Epstein and probably runs throughout whatever documents may exist about his life and lifestyle. What more can be said or done about Donald Trump, the individual, that could possibly hurt him and his reputation? It's already down the toilet and in the sewer. There's nothing that can be said. But I think that Bronco is right, that what probably rattled him is the fact that his base, upon which he relies so heavily, is so agitated about this. That is something that bothers him a great deal. And I think much of it has to do with the fact that, I have on a number of occasions pointed out that the phrase "Make America Great Again" really means "Make America White Again" to most of his supporters. That what is really at issue for most of them is the fact that white people, white males in particular, and white working males in particular, have over the course of time, at least from their perspective, lost a privileged status that they've enjoyed historically. It's a status that did not depend so much on how much wealth they might have had or what positions they may have occupied in society, but it revolved primarily around the fact that they were white. And if they were white and male, that was very special in this country. And that seems to be eroding in leaps and bounds from what they see, and that the value of Donald Trump was that this was a man who was going to restore their status. He was going to put them back in a position where all of the others who have crept into the scene in America, immigrants, people of color, people who are of the LGBTQ community, all of these others, he was going to not only move them out of the way, but he was on a visceral level going to give them the satisfaction of punishing them. And there was an analysis I saw by a psychiatrist who looked at the MAGA phenomenon and said that the cruelty has much to do with the fact that they derive a satisfaction derive some satisfaction from what they see as punitive measures that are being taken against these people who have somehow managed to get into their space. And so that one of the things that has been a big part of their fantasy is not only the punishment of immigrants and the punishment of LGBTQ people and Black people and others, but it has also been the punishment of the elites who have somehow facilitated the erosion of the status of white workers. And to the extent that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with that circle of elite people, that are cut across political lines, people who were privileged and people who were somehow changing America into something different from what it had been, in terms of their frame of reference, then there was great satisfaction in the fantasy of finally exposing these people, not just Jeffrey Epstein, but all of the people who were part of his circle, and pulling the covers back and somehow putting them in their place, twisting the knife once it's stuck in. And that has sustained a great many of these people. The idea that Trump was finally going to do this, and he knows that. And he's reached a point now where he's probably between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, he doesn't want to upset his base, but on the other hand, he's also got pressure coming from the people who are part of this elite and who probably will be embarrassed, if not destroyed, by some of the things that might be exposed if they go through some of these records and make them public. And he's probably really wrestling with this and is probably very disturbed. He knows how to delay. I mean, we're still waiting for him to make public his tax returns from 7, 8 years ago. But I guess there's a limit even for him.
Well, Bronco, it feels like there is a limit. I mean, but as you're going down the rabbit hole, it's so much more than the Lolita Express. It is the connections to intelligence, right? I mean, and they go back generations. Like when you were talking about Lex Wexner, who the Limited and Victoria's Secret and all of these tremendous brands, who was really his sponsor. I mean, he gave him his house in New York City, which is a one of the finest mansions in Manhattan, right? Who does that? But what about these links? Because I think that behind that, we kind of see maybe the reason that it seems like he was running an operation, Bronco.
Yeah, well, Epstein was long rumored to have links to intelligence agencies. Famously, there was a report way back when Alexander Acosta, the Trump's former labor secretary, when he was interviewed by the Trump transition team, one of the things that they asked him about was the so-called sweetheart deal that he had given to Epstein, where after he was convicted for this, the sprawling series of sex crimes, that he basically got a slap in the wrist, and was actually able to continue his abuse while he was still technically imprisoned. They would give him work release. And so people asked, is this going to become a problem? And Acosta's response was reportedly that he had been told that Epstein belonged to intelligence and that he needs to just leave it alone. When the FBI raided Epstein's home in a safe, they found not just diamonds and $70,000 worth of cash, but also an Austrian passport that had Jeffrey Epstein's photo, but a different man's name. And they claimed that his residency was in Saudi Arabia. And in that passport was in the 1980s, according to the stamps inside, it was used to enter 4 different countries. 4 unnamed sources told Vicky Ward, the same reporter who had broken that detail about Alexander Acosta, that Epstein had in the 80s begun working in the world of arms dealing, and then from there had kind of parlayed that into working for a number of different governments, including the Israeli government. So in other words, working for Israeli and other governments' intelligence agencies. We talked about Ghislaine Maxwell earlier, his co-conspirator, his kind of lover, partner, friend. They've been introduced partly because of Epstein's association with Robert Maxwell, who was this media mogul in the UK. He was her father. Maxwell had similarly for years been alleged, rumored to have intelligence ties to a number of different countries, one of which was Israel. There are people who are former Israeli spies who have said that Epstein had been introduced to the Israeli intelligence community by Maxwell. You mentioned Les Wexner. One of the interesting connections there as well is from the release of the flight logs of his private jet a few years ago. We know that one of the people that flew on his private jet was Lex Wexner's father-in-law, Yehud Koppel, who was not just a military figure who had, was credited with helping found the state of Israel, but who actually was a director of Israel's state-owned airline. And that airline went on to be used in numerous Mossad operations. Mossad is the Israeli spy agency. It was used in numerous Mossad operations over the years, and it's been accused of basically serving from time to time as a front for Mossad. And this was the guy that not only flew on Epstein's plane, but was in fact the father-in-law of Epstein's main benefactor in the last few decades of his life, who, as you said, effectively gifted him a house. But not just that, actually transferred total control of his own personal finances to Epstein. It's a very strange arrangement, and yet he has this kind of murky link to Israeli intelligence by several degrees. So all of it kind of brings up a lot of questions. We know that the Israeli government, U.S. officials have complained about this actually over the years, that the Israeli government does aggressive spying in the United States against U.S. officials, that when U.S. officials travel to Israel, they've been known to, Israeli officials will sort of ply them with drugs and women. That they will find that the rooms are bugged, all this kind of thing. So Israel for years has been alleged to carry out very similar spying operations as the kind of thing that Epstein has been alleged to do. I think everyone's always waiting for a smoking gun to connect these things. I don't know if we'll ever get one, but I would say that the totality of this information, that if you take all of these things together, it does start to paint a picture, and it may very well relate to the extraordinary political interference I think that the Israeli government has had in the United States over the course of decades, really unlike any other country.
Why do you say unlike any other country?
I mean, even U.S. officials and U.S. intelligence officials say the same thing, that every country spies on each other, but for a friendly government, the Israeli government is uniquely aggressive in how much it actually spies and how much it interferes. I mean, as one example, I mean, let's not even look at what happened over the last month, where Netanyahu has kind of pressured Trump into effectively fighting a war on his behalf with Iran that Trump had promised not to get into. Back when the Iran deal was first being negotiated and eventually signed, Netanyahu took extraordinary steps to try and scuttle that deal, effectively interfering in U.S. policy and interfering in U.S. domestic politics. He came and he spoke to the U.S. Congress against the deal that the American president was trying to negotiate, because he viewed it as being in the best interests of the United States. Not just that, but there was reporting at the time too that the Israeli government had actually spied on U.S. lawmakers and given some of the information that they learned to opposition lawmakers in the Republican Party in an attempt to try and help them scuttle the deal. You could go further back beyond this. I mean, there was a complaint, an allegation that Netanyahu kind of mentioned the Lewinsky affair to Clinton before they had become public knowledge, as a kind of oblique threat to the president to try and make him do what he wanted to do, and a suggestion that the Israeli government was spying on the U.S. president. Before that, if we go to Iran-Contra, that's usually thought of as this kind of domestic scandal, but actually the Israeli government, Israeli spy agencies were pretty deeply involved in that, and several of the co-conspirators in the Iran-Contra scandal, whether you want to believe them or not, they complained that the whole thing had been kind of an Israeli operation to begin with, and they had been sort of lured into it. I mean, you could go further and further back. You go on and on about all the different examples, but all of this is pretty extraordinary. One last example I'll tell you, because I think it's so telling. People remember Michael Flynn, Trump's first national security advisor. He was pretty immediately let go because he came into this firestorm, this hailstorm of accusations that he had been, working behind the scenes with the Russian government. But in reality, the reason why he had
didn't President Obama say to President-elect Trump as he was coming in, he was very specific about Michael Flynn. Do not bring him on, right?
Yeah, he was. But the reason that Flynn was speaking to the Russian government, before Trump had taken office, is because he had been trying to communicate with them to pressure them to veto this UN resolution that was going to be very bad for Israel. So what was actually happening was that the Trump administration was not acting in concert with the Russian government. As that's how the scandal is remembered. It was actually that the Trump administration was trying to pressure the Russian government on behalf of the Israeli government before Trump had taken office. So it was really more of a story about Israeli interference in U.S. politics.
But let's dig down on that, because we keep hearing about Russian interference in American politics and other global actors interfering. And is the fear that this case would reveal something else, Bronco?
I mean, I'm sure that that's probably part of it, given all the different reporting that suggests that Epstein had some kind of connections to Israel, to Israeli intelligence, I should say. I would not be remotely surprised. I mean, I can't say for sure, but it would kind of beg a belief that that's not somewhere in the mix. And I think the thing that people have to think about is that it's true that spying happens among all countries. It's true that U.S. adversaries spy in the United States, just as the United States spies in adversarial countries like Russia and China. But really, what we found is that it's actually nominally friendly governments that end up having the most influence on U.S. policy. I think because of this kind of this friendly relationship, and Israel is, like I said, it's the most kind of aggressive example, but it's far from the only one. Think about Robert Menendez, who is now going to go to prison because he was getting overt bribes from the Egyptian government, which is technically, it's not a U.S. ally, but it's a U.S. military partner. Think about what Eric Adams is facing because of his connections to the Turkish government, the alleged favors that he did. I mean, this kind of stuff is rife. Think about, I would say the most dramatic example, Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government, which had a very friendly relationship, has had a very, very friendly relationship with the United States going back decades now, we later found out after the FBI released a bunch of files and after a lot of effort by the victims of the September 11, the families of September 11 victims, that the Saudi government was pretty deeply complicit in allowing some of the hijackers to come into the country, who eventually ended up doing that terrible crime. These are all nominally friendly governments, and yet they end up having far more influence in American politics to disastrous ends than a lot of the kind of adversarial states that tend to get most of the attention and draw most of the alarm in our political discourse.
Attorney Mark Fancher, the media, and I'd love for you to speak to this, Bronco, but let me bring you in, Attorney Fancher. They've not connected these dots. You find a story here, a story there. I think that's why I found Bronco Marketish's story so fascinating, because it's like he pulled it all together. Mark.
No, I think they have connected the dots. I think they know all the things that we're talking about now. But
are you speaking of supporters and Americans in general, or the media?
I'm just talking about the media. I think they know it. They just won't report it because I think they're part of the problem. And the methods that intelligence agencies have used historically, the idea of getting influential people into compromising positions for purposes of having leverage and being in a position to blackmail them, that's out of a standard intelligence agency playbook. And the fact that Israeli intelligence would do this is not surprising. And Epstein would be a great asset for them, for him to be in a position, and I'm just speculating, I don't know these things, but for him to be in a position to lure influential people in U.S. society and government into positions where they are caught in compromising situations with underage girls and things like that, and for that to be in their hip pocket and available for them to use at any time that is necessary. It's necessary for them to force the U.S. to take a position or to do something that the Israeli government needs. that comes as no surprise. That's the way business is done in the intelligence world. The U.S., the CIA has done it historically. The fact that Israeli intelligence would do it, none of that comes as a surprise. And I think that people who are highly placed within the mainstream media, they understand how that works. But they also are part of the grand plan. And they are not going to, dime out any of these people or the agencies or anything else, because probably they too have been compromised. There are things that the intelligence agencies know about them, and they're not going to report it. And so, this is just the only people who are in the dark about these things are the masses of the people, the public, who don't necessarily know these things and who are not clued in about them. And it's not their fault that they don't know. Part of the plan is to keep them in the dark, to prevent them from knowing these things. So it's as we said at the outset, it's a blessing that much of this is coming to light, that the contradictions are rising to the surface and forcing Trump in particular to face the choice of whether to satisfy his base by disclosing some things or to continue to remain complicit in this grand conspiracy of silence among elites and among powerful people and intelligence agencies and governments and all of the people who do the dirt. And from a purely personal standpoint, I'm delighted by it all because it helps to allow people to recognize the spiritual bankruptcy of this country and Western powers and imperialism and all of those things, and to not necessarily believe that somehow salvation is going to come from these worldly actors, that they are beyond the depths of what would be regarded as filth and dirt. They are corrupt and evil beyond the imaginations of decent people, people who are highly regarded and celebrated within polite societies are sometimes the people who are the worst. And the faster that people come to that realization, the faster I think that they will come to a realization that they can't look to these people. They can't look to government. They can't look to corporations for a pathway to bringing about the type of a society that real people want.
Mm-hmm. Bronco, we have about 5 or 6 more minutes left here. And I want to ask you just, the media they have stories and they hold them. You and I both know that. There's some stories they release, the other stories that they don't release. There's some stories that they focus our attention toward and we're diverted from others. How would you grade the media's handling of this story? I mean, because we focused on Diddy. I mean, my goodness, every little piece, and then at the end of it, people were left wondering, well, why was he charged? Because I don't understand what all this was about, really. But this, to me, is far more consequential because you're dealing with people, some of the most powerful, not just influential, but the most powerful people in the world, who are basically being blackmailed over personal peccadillos.
I mean, I think it gets a bit of a mixed rating.
But wait, let me say, not that I think that pedophilia and pederasty is okay. It's not. It is not. You get these girls who are who are poor, or who are from economically wanting backgrounds, and they're vulnerable. And that it is very clear because they didn't go after these rich girls. Oh no, they didn't go after the children of influential people. They went after the girls who were folding the towels at Mar-a-Lago and other places. Folks who needed that money. Bronco.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would hope that everyone listening to this agrees with that. Yeah, I mean, I think the media coverage of this, it's a mixed bag, because a lot of this stuff has been broken by the mainstream news outlets. But the way this often happens is that when there is a great deal of attention on something, what'll happen is there'll be good reporting will slip through, it'll come through, and we'll learn things that we otherwise wouldn't have. And then time passes, and then when this issue becomes kind of a hot button issue again, or when I guess the needs of political discourse change on it, mainstream outlets, sometimes the same ones that broke some of these stories, you'll see them then saying, "Oh, well, anyone who says anything of this sort that's just a conspiracy theory, and it's ridiculous." The thing I've seen now, the prevailing kind of media coverage at the moment seems to be that this idea that not just any possible intelligence ties that Epstein may have had, but even allegations of blackmail and the idea that there were influential and powerful people involved in what he was doing or taking part in what he was doing, that is all just a nutty conspiracy theory that was invented by MAGA, by Trump podcasters and influencers, and that basically Trump and the people around him have created this monster that they can't control by creating this made up story that Epstein had done all this stuff with famous people. And I mean, if you just listen to what we've talked about for the last hour, but if you read my piece, if you read a lot of the reporting that was done about this any time before this year, that is all pretty absurd. It's very difficult to square that with the fact that Epstein was so friendly with people like Clinton and Ehud Barak and Tony Blair and Prince Andrew and so on and so forth, that he had obliquely tried to blackmail Bill Gates over an affair and a million things I could go into. And so that's what I'm seeing now. It's in a strange way, it's actually kind of supporting or doing the bidding of the Trump White House by kind of backing up their claims at the moment that this whole thing is not true. There's no client list. There were no famous or influential people involved, and there's nothing to see here. That's kind of what the media is currently pushing, while at the same time kind of criticizing Trump for having fed what they say is misinformation in the first place. And that, I think, is deeply misleading. I saw CNN, for instance, they cited this article. They wrote this article. They cited Julie K. Brown, the Miami Herald reporter, and they said they found this tweet where she said there is no client list. Anyone who says there is, that's just kind of lies, and it's an attempt to defame people. Well, she did say that, but then also what she has said multiple times in other tweets that she has put out is that, yes, there may not be any client list, but there is this trove of redacted files about the investigation that would probably reveal names of people who dealt with Epstein, and that's what should be released, and that's the stuff that's really pertinent. And so, it's I don't even think there's any kind of grand conspiracy involved here. I think that when something becomes kind of conventional wisdom, reporters have a lot of bias. Mainstream reporters have a lot of bias towards kind of reflecting that conventional wisdom and not being seen as stepping outside of that. But don't get me wrong. There's also, there was, I think, the ABC reporter who later there was footage that came out of her discussing behind the scenes how she had wanted to do this story a long time ago about Epstein and Prince Andrew and all of that. And basically her producers said, no, you can't, because we want to maintain our access to the royal family. So don't get me wrong. There is also definitely editorial interference that prevents some of this stuff from coming out if it might affect access, or maybe even, hurt the personal relationships that people in the news business have with people in power.
Should we not also, just as we begin to wrap this up, um, when we see, because there's some people who are active in, many people who are active in politics now, they have these principles and then they go in a completely different direction. Should we now, should people now take the blinders off and just say, now, who knows, who knows if someone's being blackmailed, right? I mean, because this is what J. Edgar Hoover attempted to do to Dr. King, but he was so courageous. He said, do what you will. I'm human, but I'm going to set my people free. And I'm just going to have to live with whatever it is that you release, sending tapes to his wife, bringing him into his office, confronting him, threatening him, and saying, I'm going to reveal this to you, particularly if you go get this Nobel Prize. I mean, this is what J. Edgar Hoover did. But now we're seeing, and this is not new, but we're seeing the international dimensions of this. I mean, President Bill Clinton, when he was confronted by Netanyahu 30 years ago, was in the midst of Middle East negotiations. I mean, is this why we're in the fix it we're in, because people are being personally blackmailed, Bronco?
I mean, I don't know if that's the reason. Possible. It's possible, certainly. I mean, I think also I would point to the just immense amounts of money that have been poured into U.S. elections over the past, particularly over the past 4 years, by AIPAC, the American-Israeli lobby, and a host of other pro-Israel groups that have taken advantage of the fact that the U.S. political system has been completely opened up to corruption by the Supreme Court, and use that to try and basically cow elected officials into towing their line for fear of being primaried and losing their seats. I mean, I think that's a big part of it too. So I wouldn't say every single time that we see a politician do something, because it's every time you see a politician kind of hewing closely to whatever Israel wants, even at the detriment of their own political fortunes, that's just blackmail. I think there's a whole host of things going on. But I mean, does this stuff happen? Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, you can find U.S. officials, U.S. intelligence officials complaining about the fact that when various people go to Israel, that their rooms are bugged, that Israeli officials set up women and illegal activities for them. So the stuff definitely goes on. It's a tough one. I think we have to hold that into two things in our heads: that this stuff goes on. It does not necessarily explain every single thing.
Not every single instance, but that should be like something that we can factor in.
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would definitely say. I mean, look, if this was any other country other than Israel, this would be a 5-alarm fire in U.S. politics. This would be an outrage. There would probably be declarations of war. But for some reason, it's completely acceptable that as long as a nominally friendly government, Israel is the one doing it. I mean, just compare the absolute kind of sigh of boredom, that the collective sigh of boredom that has met this, compared to the Russia stuff in Trump's first term, which in the end didn't really even end up being substantiated for the most part. So I think, I think that's kind of the takeaway: is why are we so kind of willing to accept this brazen kind of political interference from a government that is meant to be a friendly partner, and that the U.S. taxpayer sends billions upon billions of dollars to every single year. It's pretty bizarre.
Mark Fancher, I've got him. Yes, please, before we go, Mark Fancher.
Yeah, no, I would suggest that Israel is not unique, that everybody does this. And the way the game is played is that everybody gets the goods on everybody else.
Yeah.
And it holds everybody in check. And I don't know that it's necessarily always a card that's being played for everybody who makes a political decision or makes a decision about what to report or not to report. It's just that there is an understanding about the parameters of what you can and cannot say and what you can and cannot do. And you won't really feel the pressure until you reach the outer limits and you're about to cross the line. And that's when the heat is turned up on the individual actor in varying degrees, depending upon how far they're willing to go. And there are precious few people in media, precious few people in politics who are willing to push the envelope, who are willing to go beyond the line. So they may go their entire careers without really feeling this type of pressure. But if ever they choose to do it, they will. And it's for that reason that I've always advocated looking for genuine struggle for liberation outside of the entire institution that's been set up to control people. You know, the political system, the media, the mainstream media, and all of those things. We're not going to find freedom there. We got to completely abandon that because those controls are present. People have been compromised. The system has been compromised. It's corrupt, and we will not find an answer there.
Bronco Marketish, your final word before we go. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've really said it all, but yeah, I think that we need to rethink that the way we think of foreign interference in the United States. It's not just about adversarial states like Russia and China and Iran or what have you. It's really the governments that are kind of closest and considered most friendly to the United States have been able to take advantage of that friendliness to influence U.S. foreign policy, and I think for the worse often. And I think a large part of what we're seeing is that they've been able to use what has been unfortunately an increasingly corrupt political and electoral system to take advantage of that. So I think, if you want to limit the ability of governments, whether it's Israel or Turkey or Egypt or what have you, to influence U.S. policymakers, the first step is to really to clean up the system here and to clamp down on unfortunately the way that the entire U.S. political system has been allowed to run on the influence of money. Until that is fixed, I think you are going to see more and more of this stuff continue to happen.
Attorney Mark Fancher, Bronco Marketish, yesterday's man, the case against Joe Biden, but you've got to read his latest piece in Jacobin. Of course, follow him in social media. I mean, it really delves very deeply into this Epstein case, and it's important because it's not just his base, but more and more Americans just don't have faith in our institutions. And this helps to seal that, Bronco and Mark. That's and that's socially unsustainable. It's dangerous for Americans to increasingly lose faith, and particularly when we elevate people so high, as many people have done with President Trump and others. And then they come crashing down. They're not let down, they come crashing down. But I think we have to grow up in our politics and understand how the world works, everybody. And this is kind of what we're seeing. Not kind of, we are seeing this. So, I hope you've enjoyed the show today. Everybody's saying, wow, this information, yikes. AM 950 Radio, the Santita Jackson Show. God bless.